I could talk all day about the benefits of beavers. A simpler question would be, what elements of an ecosystem don't beavers benefit? My name's Elliot Keane, and I worked for Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust for 7 years and then moved roles. So I'm currently Wilder Engagement Officer. I've got a long history at this reserve specifically. I started volunteering here in 2012, and at that time it very much all led up to the answer being beavers. So we've been working in the background, and we have been finding partners who want to work on wild release projects. We've been looking at potential release sites and feasibility studies, and the Wildlife Trusts have really led the way. I've been running the tours now 3 years, and working for Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust for about 7.
Public response has just been pretty overwhelmingly supportive. People are pleased to see them here. I've given talks to lots of, local groups, environmental association, and people are really excited to have, these exciting, charismatic mammals back in this area. I'm Janice Bradley. I'm Head of Nature Recovery North for the Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, and I've been with the Trust over 20 years. We cover the whole county of Nottinghamshire, and we have some principal aims which are to bring about nature's recovery. We're aiming for Nottinghamshire to meet the global and national 30 by 30 target, which is obviously very challenging, and a very important part of that is habitat recreation, restoration, management and enhancement. So our beavers at the Idle Valley Nature Reserve are part of our species recovery aims.
Just behind me here we can see the remains of a sign that was for an area known as Chambridge Wood. That area is completely overgrown now with vegetation, and that's because we've removed all those big herbivores that would have stopped that from happening. Nature reserves in the UK now, we're managing them by mechanical means. We're using tools and machinery to mimic what those keystone species would have done that are missing from our ecosystems. That's why we have this rewilding approach more generally, and beavers are the perfect solution for the wetland that we have here.
Beavers, we know, were widespread historically across pretty much the whole of the UK, but certainly by about the 16th century it looks like they were extinct in England, a bit later in Scotland. They were everywhere in our wetland landscapes and people coexisted with them, but unfortunately for the beavers, a number of the factors which make them such incredibly effective aquatic mammals were obviously also part of the reason that they became extinct, because they have incredibly thick, warm, waterproof coats, which if you're a medieval peasant living in, freezing, horribly cold, wet conditions would have been extremely attractive. Because their tails are scaly, they were classified by the church as fish, which meant they could be eaten any day of the week. Because of their castoreum as well, in their scent glands, which was believed to have medicinal properties, particularly for pain relief. These are all reasons why it made a lot of sense to hunt beavers. And unfortunately, as we did with a lot of our larger mammals, but they were hunted to extinction.
After extinction in the UK, it was a similar picture across a lot of mainland Europe. So the beavers managed to hang on in 8 really rural, isolated pockets. And at the lowest point, the evidence suggests there's about 1,200 left in the wild at that point. So it was very close to global extinction. And then as the beavers started to recover, we were getting some regulation of hunting. There have been over 200 reintroductions into the wild in mainland Europe, and Britain's very much way behind. Nothing really happened until 2002 with the reintroduction of beavers under licence into an enclosure in Kent. Around 2008, 2009, we were starting to talk about reintroduction with the Scottish beaver trial in Knapdale in the west of Scotland. And then at a similar time, we had beavers mysteriously turning up wild in the River Tay in the east of Scotland.
See, the Scottish reintroduction of the beavers on the Tay wasn't licensed. Our beavers came from the Tay. They were rescued from the Tay by the Beaver Trust, as have been virtually all the beavers in the English enclosed beaver projects. We did our reintroduction in November 2021, and we were introduced 8 beavers. So that was a family of 2 parents and 4 kids, and then also 2 singletons. So at the time, it was the biggest reintroduction in England, the biggest single reintroduction of 8 beavers at once, and also the biggest enclosure at 58 hectares. Our 2 singletons paired straight away. They went in November 21, they bred in spring 22, and we then had kits again in 23 and 24. So, we're building a good population with 2 active breeding family groups.
So this is a log that the beavers have cut. So you can see it's cut by beavers on both ends. They'll often cut a log like this and just roll it around and get all the bark off, and they'll eat it a bit like corn on the cob. We've got some soft rush here, and this has been eaten by beavers. We're only about 3 metres from the water here, so this is prime area for beaver grazing because they want to be in or near to the water as much as possible. So when they're in the water, most of the time they're eating reeds and pondweed and other vegetation, and that helps maintain a good balance of light and dark in the pond. Often in a garden pond you might get it swamped by vegetation, have to pull some out each winter. That's where the beavers come in.
And they have been doing a fantastic job. They've done a lot of scrub restructuring for us. They are keystone species, so they've already notably improved the diversity of the habitat, and we have had calling turtle doves in the enclosure in the last 2 summers, removing trees growing in the middle of channels through the reed bed that's in the beaver enclosure, which automatically, by opening up those channels, they're improving it for species like bittern, for bearded tit, for marsh harrier, for wildfowl, for fish, for eels. So that we've seen those changes really quickly. Because they also obviously create small wetlands of their own through their excavations, their ponds. They've also dug a canal. They dug a 19-metre long canal to enable them to move wood in the winter. Means that they've created amazing ephemeral wetland habitat for amphibians. So we've seen a big increase in numbers of juvenile amphibians in the area. And that's just in, one 58-hectare enclosure. In wider floodplain landscapes, they can benefit a whole range of other species. So if you replicate that across wetland landscapes, that's what we need to bring back our lost nature. We're not going to get to 30 by 30 if we can't, get it right on our rivers and watercourses. So that's why we need beavers in those environments.
Devon's quite a unique situation. A lot of the best science we've got from England is from the Devon trial. So initially they had an enclosed trial, and that was from 2011. The scale really pointed out what could happen on a bigger scale because they had such an impact on such a small area. And in 2015, beavers were discovered living wild on the River Otter. And at that point, government officials captured the beavers and removed them from that river. There was public outcry, and it turned out that the beavers had been there since 2007, and it had just been kept quiet. Devon Wildlife Trust got together partners, and they approached the government to create a wild project so that they could study the effects when they're not within an enclosure. So the River Otter Beaver Trial was born. It was agreed that there would be this trial period from 2015 to 2020, and then we got a decision just on that catchment, and basically it was ruled that they could remain and breed within that catchment.
Oh, I love it. We need more beavers. We need more biodiversity that they're creating. Hi, I'm Sylvia Mella, and I'm doing Wildlife Tours East Devon for 3 years now. But I've been following the beavers now for roughly about 12, 13 years before it was actually official that they're on the river. 12 years ago, a friend of mine who lives in Otterton told me about the beavers. I was living in Western-super-Mare at that point. Keen wildlife photographer, been for the last couple of years, so came down and saw them, and that was it. I wanted to see more of them. Kind of taught myself a lot about the beaver, so I think I know quite a bit about them now. One family that I was following at that point between Otterton and Collerton Riley, initially we called her Bob the Beaver because we thought it's big beaver, must be the male one. After it was caught and released again, we realized it had a pink ear tag, and found out it's actually the female. With beavers, it's usually the female that is the bigger one, so it was then not Bob the Beaver anymore, but Mrs. Bob.
It's really useful to, even though it's not totally accurate, have a look at what a beaver looks like. So this is Duncan. He comes with me on all the tours. We sometimes have children, but it's just as good for adults. They love it. And they get a picture, and he gets passed around for a cuddle. So beavers, they're much bigger than this. They're the world's second largest rodent after the capybara of South America. An adult beaver is over 20 kilos. So they're about 80 centimetres in the body, plus about a 30 centimetre tail. Not many animals have evolved a tail like this, so you'd be forgiven for thinking, what's the point of it? It's a bit like a dugong. There's not many animals that have a tail like that. But it really is the beaver's Swiss Army knife, so it's used as a fin when they need a burst of speed. It's used as a rudder when they need to change direction when they're swimming. But they also use it as a seat. They fold it underneath themselves and sit on it. They also use it as an alarm, so when there's danger they'll slap it flat on the surface of the water and create a big sound to tell predators they've been seen, warn the family group of danger. They also use it for regulating their temperature, and it's used as a winter fat store. Elsewhere on their body, they've got really big hind webbed feet, and that's what they use to swim. Their forepaws are much smaller, and they're not webbed to anywhere near the extent of the hind feet. They're not really used for swimming. Instead, they're built to be dexterous, so they're digging and feeding and building, and they have opposable little fingers, and they feed not like a lot of animals, putting their head down to food. They'll feed more like us, and like a lot of rodents, they'll pick things up and put things in their mouths and create bundles of small things. And their main sense is their sense of smell, which is excellent, and they use that for chemical communications. They're marking their territory, and they can tell a lot about one another. And then when they dive, they've got waterproof fur, very dense, covered by coarse guard hairs. Their ears close, their nostrils close, and they have built-in swimming goggles. It's called a nictitating membrane that covers, it's a transparent third eyelid that covers the eyes when they dive as well. And then they can hold their breath for up to 15 minutes with all those adaptations. So they normally live in the wild 10 to 12 years, but at the 2-year mark, that's when they will leave their parents' territory and try and find their own territory. So they'll normally pair up, and they'll pair for life. They'll have an average of 2 kits a year. A normal beaver family is 6, which consists of a breeding pair, 2 yearlings which stick around to help the next generation, and then 2 kits. There's the myth that they will just breed and breed and they don't have any predators. Obviously their main predator in the past would have been wolves, which is true. We don't have the wolves anymore, but they do have lots of predators, not particularly of the adult beavers, but of the beaver kits. So things like foxes, badgers, otters, stoats, eagles, pine martens, big pike. Lots of things will eat beaver kits when they first emerge.
We do have fishermen especially who are still kind of saying, oh, the fish are going to be eaten by the beavers. And like, nope, that's not the beavers. They are only eating the trees and the leaves.
Some people say they eat fish. That's not true. That was a myth that was popularised by the Narnia books. So I always say to people, careful where you get your science from. And that's a very pervasive myth now. I'd say in an average tour group of 20, about 5 people would say fish when asked. Another group of people say they eat trees. That's much closer to the truth. It's still not quite true. So they eat some parts of some tree species some of the year. You can see all the chippings underneath, and that's once they've gone beyond the bark that's useful to them and they're into the wood itself, they're just spitting that out. That's not beaver food, and they're just trying to fell the tree. Their teeth, that's the only problem with Duncan here. He's got the wrong colour teeth. They're bright orange, so they have really iron-rich enamel on the front, and that gives it the strength they need to fell trees.
They have been trying to gnaw on some trees that were on private land, and I think they managed to fell a couple of them as well, but the Wildlife Trust came quite quickly and put some fencing around.
Individual trees, you can use a sandy paint mix, you can use wire mesh around single trees that don't want to be felled. Beavers can seem quite destructive when they fell a huge area of trees. We've got some aspen here that have come down as a result of the beavers, and they've created quite a nice glade here because it is very single age and very wooded across this whole area of the site. See, they've gnawed most of the way around. So there's a few benefits of beavers felling trees. One of them is that they feed on what's most common. It's not a coincidence that their favourite foods are, or some of their favourite foods are willow and birch, the two sort of colonising species that are a problem that we have to keep on top of for conservation in the modern day without these species here. So in that way, by feeding on what's most common, they favour what's uncommon and diversify the woodland. Sometimes on tours people will ask, what if the beavers fell all the trees? The favourite foods of beavers really readily coppice because they've evolved together. So particularly willow, like this tree behind us, coppices, and you get all that fresh new growth.
They are taking out every now and then a couple of trees, and usually more going for the branches that are hanging down and not the whole trees. And it's usually willows that are growing again.
Often a tree will live longer when it's coppiced, and of course the beavers will come back and get all that nice fresh growth, so they'll end up implementing a rotational coppice. And the other benefit, and the one that's really important for us here, and the one that really mimics what we would be doing with machinery, is their effects are really localised because they want to be in or near to water as much as possible. So that way their feeding happens most of the time within 10 metres of the water, and 99% of the time within 20 metres of the water. So a simple 10 or 20 metre buffer zone pretty much eliminates conflict with beavers, and that's a smart thing with or without beavers to create wildlife corridors and to limit runoff. The beavers will fell lots of trees on a shoreline and create quite sunny open wetlands like this, and it really favours the reed bed, and that's the more rare habitat now where a lot of protected species need to live.
The beavers have been ring barking a number of trees to create standing deadwood. Standing deadwood is an incredibly rare habitat. Almost lost species like lesser spotted woodpecker and willow tit, obviously from these lowland landscapes. So very quickly we started to see some fantastic benefits of what they were doing.
This tree here has been ring barked.
So ring barking is where you've got a standing tree, so a living tree. If you remove the bark from around it, that means that effectively the tree will die above that because it's not getting nutrients and water anymore.
As that dies back, it'll get a really important part of their territory next to the water, a lot more light, a lot more young herbaceous vegetation that is useful to them. And in the process, they've accidentally created some brilliant standing deadwood habitat that's great for woodpeckers, great for bats, insects, and they also produce a lot of deadwood elsewhere. They produce terrestrial deadwood that's great for insects as well, and submerged deadwood that's great for aquatic invertebrates as well as juvenile fish. It really allows for a much greater diversity of plant species on the ground, so we've got lots of specialised wetland plants, riparian vegetation that does just get shaded without beavers and other herbivores in the landscape. Overall, you get this patchwork of open and closed habitat types, and those species can then flower and seed, and you get all those additional benefits. They
bring lots of branches in underwater to create their winter feeding caches. They eat some of that, they don't eat all of it, so what they need is a really big, tangled, complex pile of wet wood in the water, which is absolutely phenomenally important for improving the microhabitats within the wetland. So it's been really interesting to see what the beavers have done to create these amazing piles of wet wood underwater. And in fact, we're using that now in the way we're looking at managing other parts of the reserve.
Definitely with the beavers here now, there is a bigger fish population due to the sticks everywhere stored from the beavers, which that means again it's a bigger food source for kingfishers, for the otters, herons.
One of the fears is that they will block the migration of fish. This one's much more plausible than the others, and there has been study around it in our modified rivers, where a very wide, multi-channeled river has since been canalised. It's much more of a problem when a beaver dams that. So in our modern landscape, there is more potential for conflict. Those dams aren't complete, they are semi-permeable. Small fish can even swim through the tops of those dams, and then when there's high flow, they can jump those dams just as they would jump natural waterfalls in other parts of river systems. The beavers and the fish have evolved together over millions of years, and some of the best rivers for salmon in Europe are the ones with the most beavers. Beavers benefit fish in a whole variety of ways in and around their beaver ponds, and even downstream where the water quality is better and they have exposed river gravels for breeding.
We've seen more floods and more droughts in the recent years. The beavers can work against that by storing more water and holding the flood water back.
They're a fundamental part of our floodplain. They should be there. And increasing the evidence about the benefit of beavers, not only that we knew already, like their benefit for other species, for increasing biodiversity, increasing microhabitats, we also know that in the right place they can have other benefits like natural flood management. And that's really important.
There's also loads of things as a result of dam building. So dam building slows the flow of water, creates more wetland, which sequesters more carbon. And then, because it's slowing the flow of water, we have flood mitigation, and on the other end of that, drought mitigation as well.
The easiest way to perhaps explain to people is to give examples of things like leaky dams, deflectors in watercourses. That we will put in upstream of settlements to reduce peak flood flows that hit those settlements, to try and reduce flooding, for example, of homes and farmland. And that's basically exactly what beavers do in natural systems. Will be helpful going forward in terms of reducing fire damage just by increasing the wetness overall in the landscapes.
They've built a couple of channels into the landscape as well, which absorbs more water, so there's less flooding already here. But on the side streams, there's definitely a bit of change with stemming. Water level is rising up. It's greener. Definitely 2-3 years ago, when we had that really bad drought, everything was brown and dry, and where the beavers were, it was lush and green.
There are concerns about beavers and flooding where people don't necessarily understand how they could be beneficial. There are certainly concerns about beavers flooding farmland.
When a dam is first built, you've got water impounded behind the dam. So if you've got a dam in an area like a drainage ditch that will, if it's blocked, flood an area of a farmer's field, that's potentially an area of conflict. So the thing to say there is it's very localised conflict, and the benefits are national. The cost to benefit is really in the beaver's favour. There was a study that showed that the benefits could outweigh the cost by over 100 times.
There's been some flooding of some fields, but the people, as much as I know, who are owning the lands have been okay so far. There's one field up from Otterton as well, which was flooded initially, but that was the first place where they put an overflow device in.
If it's required, you can put a flow device through the dam. So it's a pipe through the dam with a cage on either end. A flow device allows you to maintain the water level within an acceptable threshold, but the dam can remain and the beavers can remain.
There's a lot to learn from continental Europe. They've got lots of experience that we can draw on. In terms of the wider benefits, I think improving water quality, water that's also kind of agitated by beavers is now known to sequester more carbon. Benefits that you might not immediately think in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's just huge, the benefits that they can bring for people and wildlife.
There is one lodge that is in East Butley on a private field. The farmer has lost maybe a fourth of his field, but it's all nice and green. There is a huge amount of new wildflowers that are on the field now. Increase in amphibians, bats flying over as well. As long as I think that Devon Wildlife Trust and other organisations are working together with the landowners, there shouldn't be any problems with them.
Beavers particularly have a big impact. Tree felling and damming and burrows, they engineer the landscape, and for people who don't know about what beavers do, that can be quite scary. We've not had something that has that impact on the landscape for hundreds of years, but we can see what happens across Europe.
Other countries in continental Europe have plenty of experience in what to do and how to manage beavers in landscapes, including farmed landscapes and urban areas. You know, obviously there's beavers living now in the middle of German cities on rivers, doing an absolutely fantastic job.
Lots of organisations are involved with this now. We have the RSPB, we have the National Trust, and we also have other organisations that are less obvious. So we have the Forestry Commission involved, particularly for flood mitigation in areas of land that they own. We have private landowners involved as well from an ecotourism point of view. We also have partnerships with places like water companies that are interested in the benefits for water quality. So there's a series of partners coming together.
In terms of setting up beaver management groups, how they would run, you know, how local landowners and other stakeholders would be engaged, how any concerns about dams would be met and dealt with. All of that is within the guidance information for legislation, so that there would be structures in place to make sure that basically any impacts were mitigated. Through the species recovery working group that I convene, we've already identified those partners who want to have a wild beaver task and finish groups. There's a good reason why people say busy as beavers, because they just don't stop. You know, they're out there creating habitat, benefiting other species 24/7.
There's benefits not only for biodiversity and obviously the wildlife that's evolved alongside them, but huge benefits for people as well in terms of big 21st century problems like flooding and drought and carbon sequestration, water quality improvement, things like that. So yeah, couldn't be more supportive.
I think the key thing really is for us all who work with beavers, you know, and know about them, to help the public to understand the benefits beavers bring, you know, for biodiversity, for natural flood management, for sequestering carbon. You know, they can even help in the climate change battle. They have so many benefits, and that I'm sure isn't well known at all by the public. So I suppose it's incumbent on all of us to try and spread the word.
Just getting the word out to other people about what beavers do, going and seeing beavers and supporting ecotourism and showing the benefits of that. You can come on tours here.
And just come out and see the results firsthand.
Supporting local wildlife trusts like ourselves financially and with volunteering and all the other things that help. Because everyone ought to be able to have beautiful, complex wetland landscapes near where they live, full of wildlife that have been created by beavers. People want to see beavers back in their local area. I mean, everyone who comes to see them here, you know, that comes on our tours, is so excited and enthused as a result. It'd be nice that more people could have access to that. It's just extraordinary what they do.